Welcome to the HUD Security Issues for NSP Grantees conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to Mr. Vincent Grady. Please go ahead.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us today for the Security Issues for NSP Grantees webinar. As the operator said, we will be recorded and you are on mute until we take questions. So we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please change your feedback box from green to purple to let us know that you have a question. And the feedback box is in the upper right corner of live meeting. Participants can ask questions via the Q&A box within the live meeting, or you can ask your question by pressing *1. If your question has been answered, please remove yourself from the queue by pressing *2. And please wait to ask your questions until we've indicated the Q&A period. And just as a reminder, your identities will be anonymous, so feel free to ask questions as you see necessary. And at this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Janine Cunilla with ICF. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Vinny, and welcome everyone again to the Security Issues for NSP Grantees webinar on this first day of December 2011. Today we have an exciting agenda such that we have my colleagues at HUD here, as well as we have 3 grantees that have experienced security issues, have some lessons learned, and are happy to share those with you. So first let me introduce our co-moderators here. We have David, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, so David Noguera. We have Hunter Kurtz.
Hi.
And we're hoping John Lazick will be joining us in a bit. Let me review again. We're going to have presentations from Rita Parise from City of Columbus, Ohio, Brian Bissell from Lee County, Florida, and William Towns from the City of Chicago. Then after that, we're going to have an open Q&A period so everyone can get in all the questions you might have to both the presenters. So if you're wanting to understand a little bit from a peer-to-peer perspective on how did, for example, City of Chicago did you do X, or how did City of Columbus did you do Y? We're happy to have them, and they'll be on the phone to answer questions. And then we also have HUD staff here that will be able to answer any additional questions, regulatory in nature, if you need. So let's kick this off. We'll go ahead and hand it off to Rita. Rita's the housing administrator for the City of Columbus. She's been there since 2007 in that position, and she oversees the housing programs funded by HOME, CDBG, their internal city resources, and of course NSP. So Rita, please welcome, and please share with us a little bit about what you've learned around security issues with the City of Columbus's NSP program.
Thanks, Janine. Starting out a little bit about the City of Columbus, the city itself is the grantee on NSP 1 and NSP 3, and then we are the lead member of a consortium for NSP 2. All told, for all 3 programs, we've received in excess of $50 million, so we are very busy. And we are working in what we consider our most impacted neighborhoods, and we have identified key development partners, primarily nonprofit organizations. As a matter of fact, all of our recipients are nonprofit organizations. Some do partner on the development aspects with a for-profit. The neighborhoods that we work in tend to be those with very high levels of vacancy and foreclosure. Consequently, we have a lot more challenges working in those neighborhoods than we might in part of the city that isn't as impacted. However, we felt that those were the areas that most needed our time and attention, that the private market would have a better opportunity to address the less impacted neighborhoods in our city. The primary responsibility for the program rests within the Development Department. The Housing Division, which I'm the administrator of, is within the Development Department. We also have a city land bank that's resident in the Department of Development. Of course, our fiscal office is extremely important in moving the money. And then we also work with our Department of Finance, who has a grants management division, who oversees the work that we do. We got started in the security issues with a contact by an NSP1 developer who called and said, yeah, we're really used to working in impacted neighborhoods, but we are having more theft than we ever believed possible in the properties that we are working on in your city. Can you help us? So we started looking into it. The areas that were of concern to this NSP1 developer were that construction materials were being sold off the site, particularly copper wiring, which obviously is selling very well in the market right now. And believe it or not, although there is not copper pipes used in the houses, there is a brass fitting that has to go from the city water line into the plastic pipes, and we had thieves digging through the walls of the foundation to retrieve the brass fittings. So we had some very entrepreneurial and anxious individuals who were very happy to do whatever they could to harvest materials from our construction site. As construction progressed, we had thefts of furnaces, air conditioners, and appliances. And then we have issues that continue clear up until sale or occupancy in rental properties, break-ins, kicking in of the doors, vandalizing both the interior and exterior of the property. What's been really interesting in our experience is that while we've had a couple developers reach out to us directly and say, yeah, we really need your help, some of them have not. And in fact, not to pick on Habitat because I think they're a great partner, but it was when I went to a Habitat dedication ceremony on one of their homes that one of the volunteers walked up to me and said, we're really sorry we didn't get this house done sooner. We've been delayed 6 weeks because of the theft of copper wiring. Well, that's when I knew that we really had to take a more active role in trying to address these issues with all of our developers, even those who were not speaking up, so that we would be as effective and as successful as we possibly could. So in addressing theft and vandalism, we started with our neighborhood liaisons, also within the Department of Development, who then reached out to the Columbus Police and set up meetings with a detective who's assigned to investigate the scrap metal thefts throughout the city, as well as the community liaison officer for the affected neighborhood. And we brought those together with a developer and contractor. The first thing that they wanted to know was where all they were developing at. So we had the developer and contractor provide a list of addresses of the sites that were under construction. And in turn, the police provided a consent form, and that is in my next slide, in which it basically gives the police officers in that neighborhood the authorization to enter onto the property. And that gives them the opportunity, obviously, if it's Wednesday morning and it's sunny and bright out, the chances are the people on the property are there to actually work. If it's Saturday evening and it's dark and they're working by flashlight, they probably are not authorized to be on the site. And so obviously our police officers do have some discretion relative to how they approach, but it does give them the authorization to enter the property and remove the trespassers, which has proven to be very effective. Both the contractors and developers and the police officers are very happy to have this form on file. It's interesting because different parts of our city want the form submitted different ways. Some of them want them to go directly to the dispatchers. Some of them want them to go through the neighborhood police officers, but we have really worked out a process with our folks so that they know which way to go. The other thing that we did was get in touch with our Department of Building and Zoning Services, and they are the folks that do the inspections, the construction inspections that lead up to certificate of occupancy. And the two issues that seem to be most pressing to our developers and contractors was, is there some way to get a day of inspection as the electric is brought onto the site? Because as soon as we bring the electric onto the site, we can hook up our alarm system and we will be much more secure in terms of how we manage our materials and how safe the things that we've already brought into the house are. And then the second one was, as we are finishing the house and as we are preparing for sale or occupancy, is there some way to stage the inspection so that we can bring the air conditioner and the appliances on site and hopefully be occupied that day or the next day, so that there is not the opportunity for an extended period of time where somebody can break into the house and take the stuff. So in both cases, there has been a process worked out to do these day of inspections. It has generally been pretty effective. The interaction, the initial meeting between our developer, our contractor, and the police officers provided everybody with a better understanding of what we were doing. That number one, what is neighborhood stabilization? Because police officers are not necessarily focused on that. What kind of time and cost sensitivities do we have relative to moving forward? They have to understand that we really cannot, in these programs, wait for an extended period of time for things to be reordered and reinstalled and the like, so they had a much better understanding of why we wanted to move quickly. And it also gave our police officers an opportunity to share with our developers and contractors what the crime issues are in the neighborhood. Some of the developers said, well, you know, we didn't really realize that this was an active neighborhood in theft and vandalism, as we found out from our police officers. So once they understood that, they realized they had to be as careful as possible. And obviously, including an alarm system in their process was something that they really needed to do. The police officers, in turn, left with specific addresses and consent forms so that as the different officers were doing drive-bys in the neighborhood, if they saw activity at a particular address that appeared that it could be troublesome or criminal, they were able to call the dispatcher. The dispatcher is able to verify that, in fact, it is a site that it has a consent form on file, and then they're able to enter that site and determine what kind of activity is going on. Now, along with that, you have to make sure that your contractors and your subcontractors who are on site are aware of the fact that the police have the right to enter. And if they are actually working on a Saturday evening, hopefully they will be doing better than under flashlight, but that they have some kind of ID or authorization to be on the property so that there is no misunderstanding. But our discussions with our developers have indicated that this has worked out pretty well. In talking with one developer, shortly after the meeting with the police, they found that the amount of theft and vandalism on their sites had decreased significantly. They attribute that both to the additional vigilance from the police officers as well as a better understanding of crime in the neighborhood. Also, most of our developers now work with our Building and Zoning Services Department and coordinate these inspections for the electric hookup and the final with the air conditioners and appliances, which really minimizes the opportunity for theft. These measures have worked well enough that developers that are working in other jurisdictions have also requested the same assistance. And specifically, in our NSP2 program, one of our consortium partners is Franklin County, which is the surrounding county that the City of Columbus is located in. And as we have been talking through some of the construction strategies on county projects, one of our developers says, well, this is how the City of Columbus does it. It sure would be nice if the county would do the same thing. So they obviously feel that it's working. They feel that it's been beneficial relative to how they are proceeding with their projects. And so consequently, we've obviously encouraged the county to the greatest extent possible to help out as they can. Other things that have come up in our work, because we are working in our most impacted neighborhoods, most of our developers have elected to purchase metal cages for the air conditioners, and we allow that as a permitted expense. Obviously, it protects the property as the air conditioner is going on site, but it also, frankly, protects the future homeowner because there are instances within the city in which people who are living in the house have cold air 1 minute and it's gone the next. So obviously, it's a long-term issue, and we see it as a valuable investment. Another thing that we do here locally is we meet with our developers quarterly and talk about different issues, different technical issues that are coming up in the NSP program, different strategies to approach things. And we have, over the last few quarters, provided speakers both from the police department and Building and Zoning Services to discuss the issues, who to call, how to reach out so that they have all the information they need so they can be successful. In turn, as a result of our presentation from our police officers, I was invited to do a program on the NSP to the community liaison police officers throughout the city. And that's where we got into a more detailed discussion of the consent form. And we have actually made the consent form available. I've got a very talented person working in my office, obviously not me, who was able to work with Adobe Acrobat, and so she created it as a fill-in file that we can just email to our developers, and they can, in turn, fill it out, type it all out right on the computer screen, so even if you have illegible writing, they can still make out what's going on, print it out, and send it off to whoever in the police department wants to work with them. The picture you have in this particular slide is a picture of a property that is complete and up for sale. And while it has been up for sale, it has been broken into several times, and the last time, extensive vandalism and theft. They did have appliances on site, and those appliances were removed. So even when it looks like it's all done, it's never really all done. Another thing to touch on is the role of insurance. We require that either the developer or the contractor or both carry insurance on the property. And if there's any theft or vandalism, we will allow the deductible as an allowable expense, but anything over and above that, they must file an insurance claim. And some developers will say, well, gosh, that's going to increase the cost of our insurance. Well, our policy is that you maintain the insurance for a reason. If the premiums go up, that is a cost of doing business, but not having insurance is frankly just not acceptable to us on a variety of levels. The picture that you have in this slide is a picture of a home. It's a Habitat home on the west side of our city that in fact was damaged by fire, not because of anything that happened on site, but because of an adjacent property that was also vacant that caught fire. And as you can see, they did extensive damage to brand new siding on the exterior. Luckily, the developer is well insured in this instance. We don't believe that we're going to have any out-of-pocket expense through the NSP program to cover this. But it does happen, and it happens more often than you really want to believe. Another issue that we've run into in dealing with security issues has been issues of our staff and also some of our contractors. One of our staff persons was on a site inspection, actually en route in a city car to a site inspection, driving past a funeral that turned out to be the funeral of a gang member, and all of a sudden, before he knew what was going on, there was a gang-related shooting going on. So obviously it was a very disturbing event. A few weeks after that, actually in exactly the same neighborhood, one of our contractors who was on site was robbed at gunpoint. Somebody came into the house, pulled a gun, and robbed the contractor that was on site. And trying to deal with these issues, one of the things that we've done is we have a citywide training office, and they are now working with our staff on a monthly basis to provide safety instruction, how to recognize dangerous situations and how to get out of the way. The other thing that's been a standard operating procedure for us has been that all of our city staff that go onto construction sites travel in city-owned and marked vehicles. So if the police see somebody wandering through the building on one that has a consent order filed, but they see that there is a city car parked outside, they are aware that it is a city staff person. In addition to that, if the police elect to go into the building, all of our city staff people carry city IDs, and so they're able to identify themselves easily and quickly. Going to lessons learned, the first one, frankly, intuitive. People are always more important than the property. And so we are always very concerned on how and what steps we can take to make sure that our staff and our contractors as individuals are as safe as they possibly can be. The other thing, frankly, is that timely communication is critical. Those developers who reached out to us as soon as they became aware that they had an issue had much greater success than those who are not communicating with us, because we are not able to bring all the right parties to the table and give them the assistance, frankly, that they need. And that really leads to the third one, which is bringing the right people to the table brings effective results. One of the other things that we have seen, frankly, that works is as long as our contractors are good neighbors to the folks that they are working adjacent to, those neighbors will look out for the benefit of the property and make sure that if there is something going on, that they're contacting the police. If, on the other hand, we have somebody who's not being a good neighbor, we've had complaints about contractors working too early in the morning, using inappropriate language around young children, or leaving debris in the adjacent yard, they don't tend to be as enthused to be good helpers and good neighbors. So we've encouraged a lot of relationships in that regard. So that wraps me up.
Thank you so much, Rita. We really learned a lot about some strong partnerships with regards to police, how to work on insurance, and some great lessons learned around how to communicate and whom to communicate to. It seems pretty essential in the work that you're doing successfully. Let's move to our next grantee who's going to be presenting. We have Brian Bissell. He's an NSP rehab specialist with Lee County, Florida. He's been with the program since the beginning of 2009. And Brian's able to talk from a little bit of the perspective of a rehab construction specialist. He brings extensive residential construction and rehab experience to the program. So welcome, Brian, and we look forward to hearing about security issues as it relates to Lee County.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I hope I can give as good presentation as Rita did. That was wonderful. Briefly, real quick, to give everybody the lowdown on what Lee County's been doing. We've received NSP1 and NSP3 funds that total a little bit more than $24 million. We have purchased 165 single-family homes or have them under contract to purchase. Again, a total of 165. We've resold 97, and we have another 17 pending sales. On the multifamily side, we do use a nonprofit for this aspect of it. We have purchased, or through them, or they purchased through us, rather, I'm sorry, 70 units, which includes 6 buildings. And to date, we have generated just a little bit less than an additional $5 million in program income from the resales of the single-family homes. Now, going on to the next step is my job as acquisition is to go out, find the properties, do the inspections, and then make a determination whether we're going to go ahead and acquire them. I go ahead and write up the specifications for the work with a coworker of mine. We then bid the work out to general contractors that are local. Then at this point we would go ahead and oversee the process, the draws, invoicing, etc. And then we do overall property management for those properties. And then of course at the end is when we resell them to the qualified buyers. Then our security issues. Obviously with everybody you have security issues prior to the rehab, and once you purchase a property, security issues during and then after, and I'll go into more detail here in a little bit. As far as the insurance, which seems to be a critical part, Lee County has taken a different approach than what Rita did in Columbus. We actually are self-insured. So our decision on getting individual insurance policies from the general contractors for each given project, from a single-family side only, the multifamily side was done differently, but from a single-family side, we elected not to have the contractors go out and get the builder's risk policy for each location. Part of our thinking was that was going to add to the overall costs, and it may not necessarily be necessary for that, given the conditions that we were building in. Most of our properties are in rural areas. We're not really working within city limits other than the multifamily side. So we are in more residential areas, single-family homes, some subdivisions, and then just some individual lots that you can build on. But we did require our general contractors to have insurance, which is kind of a state requirement as well for the state of Florida. They need to have workman's comp and general liability. Now, as far as any issues that have come up, if it was a situation where the contractor was negligent in securing the property, and we had, advised them of this situation well in advance on all our pre-bid meetings on locations, that if they leave the house unsecured, then we would go after them for reimbursement for whatever had been taken. So, but if it was secured and there was signs of an actual break-in, then again, we are self-insured, so then we would address it. I would get a call, I go out, or I'm the one that inspects and does the property management, so I would find the house that would then have been broken into. At that point, we call the sheriff, and I file a police report, take photographs, and then report back to my manager, and then on forward up to headquarters here in Lee County. Obviously, here's a quick photograph of a situation where here's an air conditioning unit prior to any kind of rehabilitation. We do not do any security for that. In this case, it's going to get replaced, so we didn't feel the need to necessarily go ahead and spend any money to totally secure that. Then on to the different phases that we have found for security. Our first was basically just to do nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. And just do property management, try to keep track of the property, and try to at least do an inspection once every 2 weeks, if not, more often than that. obviously as we purchased more homes, that became a little bit more difficult. Then we moved into a situation where we found a bank that had a large number of properties that were never lived in, and we negotiated a deal to purchase them with appliances in them so that they would be included in the purchase. Well, obviously early on we're all kind of naive as to what our dilemmas would be. So therefore, being naive, we thought that was a good idea, but it turned out to be a big mistake because obviously we were targeted. I think people would look at the property appraiser's website. They'd probably Google what we've purchased, and then they'd find addresses and know, because of the type of house that we purchased, they knew that it had a full allotment of appliances in there that were all brand new. So then we moved into making it look like somebody was living there and had some kind of lights on for security, maybe a couple inside and then some outside. And of course that maybe helped a little bit, but then of course it makes it stand out like an eyesore or a sore thumb. Everybody knows what's going on because the lights are on 24 hours a day, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there's nobody there. So then what we did is we went ahead and added an alarm over on the side of the house to help protect the air conditioning unit and our well equipment with motion sensors, a sounding alarm, and then some floodlights. We did find some success in that, and we did find that obviously with the alarm sounding, you're more prone to having neighbors call, which is what we did have, and it worked out great. I think we even maybe came close to catching someone in the act. They probably left within minutes of us arriving, so that was kind of tough to endure, but again, we learned our lesson. So then we kind of did a combo, and we did some cages over the AC equipment, similar to what Rita had discussed in the city of Columbus. We then would, at this point, would try to work with the contractor on site, schedule the work. In our situation, the homes were selling almost as quickly as we got them available, so our risk factor was a little bit less than some of the ones that would be sitting out there for a while. But then we would still try to schedule the work so that it would coincide with the sale of the property. So then what we did is, knowing that we had a really tight bond with our local sheriff, I ended up creating a good rapport with one particular detective who was in charge of that aspect in this one particular section where we had a lot of problems. So we kind of worked with him to help catch people, both appliance and HVAC thefts. He had a confidential informant that we actually caught that broke into and removed some appliances from one of our properties. So using that informant, we were able to go ahead and create a situation where they were able to track the appliances and actually get to the source where they were selling them, and they ended up causing a huge bust here in Lee County believe it or not, at an appliance store where they were using them to resell these units. So the guy selling the appliances at his own store was actually receiving stolen property, and they were able to apprehend them, and it worked out great. So then on top of that, we also had neighbors that were kind of keeping watch. I mentioned about the successful apprehension of our suspects, and then other things that we discussed with the sheriff that, and each deputy seemed to have his own opinion. You know, every time I'd have to call for some kind of report, the lockbox on the front doors for access is great for access, but it also raises a red flag that means that house is probably vacant. The same with our notices in the window. We put notices in kind of along the same lines as what Rita did in the city of Columbus, kind of authorizing and letting people know that the sheriff did have the ability to go in and access the house. So he discouraged us from doing that, although we really had no choice, so we just kind of had to endure. So here, this slide represents really 3 different things that we did. The first smaller slide, where you see the padlock, that's the actual junction box for the electricity for the AC unit outside. So we thought that would be a discouragement for the theft from taking place. However, what we discovered is it didn't make any difference. They would still cut the live wire, which, of course, was extremely, extremely ridiculous for somebody to do. And when we approached the job site that this particular job was on that had gotten a stolen AC unit, realized that the power was still on. You could still hear it humming. I was shocked that we didn't have a body laying there right next to the unit. So then that's phase one. Phase two is the picture on the right, which depicts a motion sensor with a red light that flashes, has a very loud alarm, and then two pairs of floodlights, one facing front and back. So hopefully if it goes off, somebody can see somebody running away. And then, of course, the cage at the bottom, which is kind of, we thought would be the caveat of everything and discourage everybody from breaking in. Of course, in our cases, they break in, they take that, they break inside the house, remove the copper from the air handler inside the garage or the attic. They then take the line set that runs through the attic out, to the outside of the building, and they would just pull that whole thing right off, and it would be, again, undeniable derelict on somebody for stealing that right off a house. So this is the result of having a cage put on, and as you see up at the top of the picture, that same motion sensor. Obviously, it didn't discourage them at all. In this particular location, it has a wooded lot behind it and off to the side. So they didn't have any problems cutting it and breaking into the house and moving forward to steal more things. This particular house actually had the kitchen sink stolen. So, yes, we've had everything, including the kitchen sink, stolen from our properties. Another property, the thefts were unusual, where they would take a grinder, they would grind the hinges off the door and then replace the door as if nothing had happened. Showed up at the site to make my inspection, went to open the door fell right on me. So, quite unusual ways of gaining access and then hiding it. In that house, they took nothing, but they ruined the door, so no big deal. We move on. Again, here's an issue where, again, we had our alarm on the side of the house, and you can see there that cover is where the line set was removed. Our situation is there's a switch inside the garage that would turn it on and off, so that if you had somebody there cutting the grass or kids playing in the yard, your alarm wouldn't go off all the time. Well, our suspicion was it was kind of inside jobs that was going on, because we were finding those alarms being turned off by the switch. We knew it wasn't us because in a couple instances we went ahead and checked those ourselves and made sure that they were on and active. So that was again part of our concern and what we've run across. And then lastly, certainly agreeing with Rita again at in Columbus, our situation is the sooner we get the house rehabbed and occupied by a party, a qualified individual or family, the less likely we're going to have a situation where someone's going to do a break-in. Knock on wood, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but ever since we've closed on the first house, of those 97 or 95 that we've closed on so far, we have not had a call back saying that somebody had broken in or had stolen something. So here's a good example of a house that we purchased, of course, bank foreclosure, purchased it for $22,000, did a total rehab. As you can tell, it was in pretty bad shape just from an outside standpoint, and the inside was equally as bad. Turned around, did the rehab, and now we've resold that house for $99,000. So in our situation, we're very pleased with the end result, and we've all kind of had to endure our little hiccups as we go along the way. So I hope that's been helpful for those of you listening, and looking forward to any questions that you may have at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. It was very helpful to hear about more of a rural perspective to the issues that face security, as well as strong partnerships like Rita that you developed with the police and sheriff. Now I'd like to introduce William Towns, and he is with Mercy Portfolio Services, which is actually the entity that manages the City of Chicago's NSP portfolio. And with the responsibility of the overall implementation of the city's NSP grantee, William works with the city to establish, direct, maintain, and plan the community economic development activities of, I believe it's over $169 million worth of NSP programs. So welcome, William. We look forward to hearing your the issues you guys have confronted in more of an urban setting within the City of Chicago.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just start off, being the third on the issue of security. I'll try not to shed light where there's no darkness, and really point to a couple of things that are unique to Chicago to kind of give a breadth of the things that we are challenged with. Just some quick overview on the city. So over the past 15 years or so, the city has, like many cities around the country, has invested millions of dollars aimed at helping to revitalize and stabilize our difficult and hard-hit communities. These investments took the shape in forms of schools and police stations, libraries, affordable housing, retail centers, etc. And all of that hard work over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, even prior to that, was literally being wiped out by the crisis. And so the city quickly gathered a group together to try to plan on how we're going to combat this issue. And fortunate for the city, a year and a half later, the NSP program was born, and the city was very fortunate to receive $198 million in 3 rounds of NSP. The city also recognized quickly that being a large municipality and running a city the size of Chicago makes it difficult to be very nimble and quick, which is what the NSP program called for. So they looked for a partner which they could manage both of the pluses of each individual organization to create some quickness and nimbleness that would help. And so the City of Chicago partnered with Mercy Portfolio Services, and the goal was MPS, being a smaller, more nimble nonprofit organization, could leverage the strengths of the city, giving us sort of the best of both worlds. We have the strength of the city with the nimbleness of a small business. And this partnership allows us to get direct access to the building department, the law department, police, fire and water, and et cetera. And combining that with our community organizations, nonprofit and for-profit partners, and the residents in our community, this becomes basically our security plan. Our abilities to work with the building department, law, the community organization, and so forth, form sort of our initial team to try to help secure these properties as we try to revitalize these communities. So again, the City of Chicago has 3 rounds of NSP. We've got a total of 813 units and 158 properties, and we're working in 22 communities spread out, as you can see by the map, across the city. So each of these communities represents a unique challenge and opportunity, but taking the sort of 50,000-foot level, you can start to see some patterns and similarities that can help create sort of a baseline security level that's necessary for all properties, and then create levels above that as we go forward. The way that the City of Chicago's neighborhood stabilization process works. So MPS, we at the direction of the city go out into these 22 communities and acquire properties on behalf of the program and keep them in what we call sort of our warehouse. This is an LLC that we hold properties to until they're actually transferred to an actual developer who's going to be participating in the program to complete the work. And so MPS does not do any of the development, but acts more as a conduit on behalf of the city between the REO holders, investors, and banks, and the development partners who will actually complete the work. And so we have an RFP process in which we've acquired, has been filled out, and these developers have applied for and been approved. We hold these properties. We send out notification that properties are available. These developers bid on these properties. There's a developer selected. And then they take on these properties and assume the development risk during the construction and marketing period. And so we have several phases of security. The first one being when we acquire the property directly from the REO holder and hold it until the developer is found. And so our first order of business, as always, is to secure the building. Here in Chicago, we have a very aggressive vacant building ordinance, which sets forth the minimum standards the building must be kept upon it becoming vacant. And so the first thing we do upon acquiring the building is we register it with the City of Chicago as a vacant building, giving the owner, us, MPS, and then the address of the property. Because, again, with our partnership with the city, there is normally a fee involved in this. We have been able to get that fee waived for us as a part of this program, and so we go forth and do that. The actual securing of the property is done by a couple of property preservation organizations that have been procured through a request for qualifications or request for proposals. And so we work with one group, a nonprofit called 180 Properties, and a second group called Dust Them Clean. And what they do is upon us acquiring the buildings, we notify them. They immediately go out the day of the closing, clean up any trash, debris, cut grass, or remove snow as winter is coming, secure the property, lock it up. Then take photos of this work being done and get that back to us. We also have to have insurance during this stage. And you can imagine having 100-plus properties across the city in various conditions. Insurance is critical. And again, we want to make sure that we met the minimum requirements by NSP, but also want to protect the city of Chicago as additionally insured, but then also us as a nonprofit to ensure that we're not taking any undue risk. One of the early challenges we found with dealing with security companies that secure buildings across large parts of the city is that they use a lot of similar codes and lock procedures. And so very early on we discovered that certain elements within the communities were actually running around with keys to get into many of the properties across the city, not only our properties but other properties as well. And so we had to come up with a unique sort of code and lock system, and then we randomly adjust those and change those out depending on how long we're holding the property. Again, we're holding the property in time for the developers to take it. But during that process, there is a period in which these developers who are bidding on the properties have access to go into the property. So there are a bunch of different groups and contractors and subcontractors during certain periods that are going in and out of the property. We want to make sure, again, knowing a lot of times these are inside jobs, that we are taking the most precaution that we can. We also want to make sure that we could track all of these properties in some systematic fashion. So we're spread across the city in 22 communities, over 100 properties. We want to be able to guarantee the city that we could know at any point in time what the conditions of these properties are. Were they broken in? When did they get broken in? And so forth. And so we created a system called Community Central, which we work with to keep track of these properties. And here you can see sort of a basic property management tool that we use. The property highlighted is the property at 3518 West Lemoyne. You can see from the pictures there that the building is secured, front and back. These property preservation companies go out to these properties a couple of times a week to ensure that they are secured. They're taking pictures of the front and back, removing trash or debris. We do have a lot of dumping in some of our communities, so we want to make sure we remove those obstacles away. Again, keeping in mind that we're not only trying to secure the property, but we're also trying to be good neighbors. So we want to make sure we address all of those concerns with the neighbors as well. Numbers and phone numbers to call are posted clearly on the property, so if in the event of any emergency or anything that's needed to be addressed, they can contact us immediately. We do also notify the local police which ones are the NSP properties and the aldermanic office as well. Once the building is transferred to the developer, we get into sort of the second phase, which is the construction and then the marketing and sale issue. I think the one thing that we noticed is that one size truly does not fit all. We thought we had a basic sort of standard package in the beginning, and we've discovered that that was totally inefficient depending on the community you're in and what the particular challenges were. And so in this picture here, on the left, there's a gentleman here who's one of our developers. It's a nonprofit organization called Community Male Empowerment, and that's Mr. Melvin Bailey. And he, for whatever reason, has a unique, intangible talent. His properties are in some of the worst communities in the neighborhood. He sells them right away, and he never has any break-ins. And this is a gentleman who is out in these communities talking to the neighbors. If there's a group of young men hanging out in the corner, he has no problem walking over to them, asking them what they're doing, asking them do they want a job, giving them a shovel, and really trying to keep engaged with these communities and getting them moving. That's a unique talent. Not all our developers have that ability. Not all of them are even willing to enter into some of these groups to talk to these young men and ladies. But he has that ability. He has had 0 break-ins. He has left equipment and tools out by accident and can find them still there when he gets back. And so we have to deal with the developers that we're dealing with, the particular talents that they have, and also make sure that we provide some minimum amount of security. And so we look at each situation as unique instance and then create an overall plan based on that. The other thing we discovered is that's the good. There's also the bad. We've had a lot of break-ins. Again, I think we've all made the mistake of putting the appliances in sort of early on. We've made that adjustment, the cages around the AC units and so forth. And that's the bad. The other part we didn't realize was the marketing. And so, again, you can see on the picture on the right here, it's one of the homes that we had an open house. We've had a tour. People come through. We've got a big sign that kind of highlights HUD, cities, everyone's participation in making this possible. And we thought in the beginning this is a fantastic idea. This is an opportunity to tell people who are maybe holding on to their homes to stay put. You know, the city, the government, everyone's behind you, and we're coming here to help stabilize these neighborhoods. That is true. On the other hand, it also notifies those people and those criminal elements in the neighborhood that there's new stuff going in the building. And so they take these signs as actually opportunities, much like you would a for sale sign or a sale sign at a local department store. And so they started to target all of our properties in which we've had the signs in front. And so we've had to make that adjustment. And so that's a difficult thing with the way that the City of Chicago's program is. We are giving these properties to the developers. They are responsible for ensuring that these properties are delivered in a timely fashion, that it can get sold so that they can get their fees and sort of move on and move to the next house. Not having a sign and things like that does, in fact, inhibit or delay their ability or hinder their ability to market the property. But it is much cheaper to spend a little bit more on marketing and trying to figure a way to get the word out than it is to replace your copper, your cabinets, toilets, and so forth twice a month. And so, again, these are things that we've learned. How do you market? How do you get the word out without attracting undue or unnecessary attention? The developers, again, must understand that as a part of their plan, they must provide security for not only the property, but its workers. And this is, again, along the same lines of both Rita and Brian. We automatically, I think, go to the fact that, oh, my God, they're there to steal the copper, or they're there to steal the appliances or the tools. But we have, in several occasions, had run-ins in which the actual construction workers were the target. We've had some instances where you're not only having to secure the building and the workers inside the building. So how do you do that? So we have required that, again, much like Rita, all of our employees at NPS that go on site actually have photo IDs, including myself. So if I'm going into a site to take a visit to see progress, I actually have to have my ID. I also must notify the developer in advance that I am coming, the window in which I plan on being there, and identify a person who I'm to request to see who's on site. So again, if any of these steps aren't done, you're not getting access into the building or into the property. So again, we've had employees who have gone out and said, whoa, I'm just around the corner from another project. I didn't get a chance to inspect it last week. Let me drive by and see how things are going, and they did not get access to the property. And so we make sure that we hold those requirements and standards hard and not be flexible, because we have had instances where developers have opened the door and let someone in and, in fact, been assaulted and robbed. And in these cases, it's just a risk that we just can't take. The other more challenging issue that we have with protecting workers on site is protecting workers who are working on the exterior of the property. And so, again, here we've had some challenges in some communities where vendors have actually been robbed or assaulted. We had the People's Gas who were coming in to put the gas meter. They've been targeted and robbed, and they actually stole a gas meter. These are things that early on you don't really think about, but you've got to create some sort of plan. We had a landscaper who was attacked. Again, and these times are what's also challenging. We're seeing that these instances sometimes are occurring on a Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock on a completely sunny day in the middle of a block. So it's not as if they're waiting till dusk or dawn or something like that to move in. these are times where you think in these neighborhoods people are out and about and moving, and you wouldn't try to attempt something like this. But again, I think in some of these communities, these are very desperate times. And the city realized that when they made these selections. Again, much like Rita, the city made a determination that these difficult areas were the areas where we needed to go into. And so not only are these areas hard hit by foreclosure, but in some cases they have unemployment rates of 20% or higher. And so there are really rough times there, and we have to work carefully to help restore that. On the insurance front, the developers, like everyone else, are required to at least hold the minimum requirements that are held for the NSP program. So that's workers' compensation and employee liability. And again, we tend to think of these things as being needed for accidents related to performing the work on site. But in fact, again, with assaults and things that are happening, it's unfortunate they're having to use this coverage to actually go towards those things and not sort of job-related injuries, but actually attacks on employees by criminals. Again, I mentioned we've had some robberies at gunpoint. So again, automobile liability, again, you don't think of that much. You think of maybe that's a car crashing or bumping into a site or doing something like that. But in fact, in one of our assaults, the criminals came into the property bearing a gun, asked for all the wallets, all the wallets, car keys, and cell phones, took that and took vehicles when they left the premise. And so again, you've got to have these coverages and things in place for that. Valuable papers, that's the architectural drawings, things like that that may be on site. Surprisingly, as weird as that sounds, those have been torn up or thrown in some occasions. And so again, we take this sort of knowledge and adjust our security plan. So we're asking again that people show up with a minimum amount of stuff that they need to do their job, not going to the cash stations and things like that and carrying large amounts of money. We've had particular cases where people were getting robbed every 2 weeks on Friday, which just so happens to coincide with some of the payments or paydays. And so we made those adjustments, and we get those words out to all our developers on that. And then obviously the builder's risk, installation insurance, and so forth, that covers the actual materials and things that need to be replaced in case of theft. Now, what we've learned here is that we've had several of our developers who have met the requirements of the builder's risk by carrying the coverage. But what you have to do is dig deeper to understand what exactly happens in the event of claim. So in some cases, we've had developers who have had vandalism, where the actual appliances or fixtures were not stolen but damaged. And as you read through their actual policy, that was not covered. They were covered in the event of theft, but not vandalism. And so we've had to go in and make sure that those adjustments are there, and then also then taking that information and spreading it out to our development partners so they can ensure that they have the proper coverage. I think some of the challenges we see here in Chicago changes with the seasons. We have, kind of summer versus winter, which is floods versus fires, or theft versus squatters. In the summer, we've had, again, with our ability to work with the water department, several issues with people coming in and stealing pipes and properties flooding. Calling the water department to come out to shut the main off or shut the water off at the Buffalo box, things like that have been critical. In the winter, that changes because now you're not necessarily dealing with theft, but you have to deal with squatters. And so there, again, as the harsh winters roll in, are trying to keep warm. They're not necessarily intending to burn buildings down, but we know that happens. And so we've got to make sure that we secure these properties and do checks, not only of the exterior but the interior of these properties to ensure that it's still secure and that no one's putting themselves or any other neighbors in jeopardy. The other thing I think is important is understanding the area's sort of development and sales cycle. So here, I think it's much like other parts of the country, we are winding down sales and probably will not have sales pick up again until March. So you've got a 4-month period, November to March, in which sales will be incredibly slow. So if you are just finishing up a property now at the beginning of December and have to hold it, which, sale time leads here in Chicago are a little lengthy, that becomes difficult. you've got heating costs and things, pipe freezing, that type of stuff that you've got to watch out for as these thieves come in. And so just knowing that and planning appropriately, I think is critical. Again, the NSP program doesn't necessarily allow us to delay construction and so forth to get back in cycle, but just knowing what that does is important. Also, I've talked to several other non-NSP developers who are working in some of these communities that tell us that they just sit on properties during this period. And so they will acquire the property now because they've got the money, but they don't want to have the building complete and sit, so they just board it up and wait. The problem with that is, as Rita had indicated in her picture, I believe, it's not only our property that we have to be concerned with, but the properties adjacent, right? And so if they leave the building just boarded up and they're not making their checks and making sure it's secure, a fire there could, in fact, cause damage to our property. And so we monitor and watch those adjacent properties and things in the block as best we can. And then we use what I call the broken window theory. We're not trying to just secure the property where we're at. We're trying to provide security for the community or for the neighborhood or for the block. And so we want to make sure that we report directly to the building department any buildings that we find in violation of the city's vacant building ordinance. We want to make sure that those buildings get secured, that we call the law department, that they issue the fines and things like that that are necessary to secure these properties. Because as these thieves roam through the neighborhood, if they see that that these properties are being left vacant and not being tended to for quite some time, they will think that it's open season. So we got to make sure that we report all of those as well. I think when I look at some of the lessons learned here in Chicago, I think the first thing we always say is that we're always learning. The example Brian gave about the live electrical wires, people are desperate or crazy or a little combination of both. And so no matter what extreme we take, we know it's a real cat and mouse game, and we constantly have to improve and make adjustments. We've had cases of people who have cut through the roof and lowered themselves into properties. And so that's things that you wouldn't normally think of trying to secure and probably wouldn't secure anyway. But that's just to go to show that the length of the length that people will go to get into buildings and things like that. Obviously, like everyone else said, working closely with the neighbors and the local police. We did have the police come out with us. We have them case and look at properties and let us know how thieves are getting into properties in some of these communities, what are their access points, what the trends are, those types of things, and we make sure that we try to address those particular breaches and so forth. One thing the police told us, too, is to make sure that the tree branches are cut on the streets and that the street lights are all working. Doesn't seem like a big sort of deal, but they're saying as they're driving through these neighborhoods, if the trees, and this is winter now, but during the season, it blocks the lights and creates shadows, and it makes them very difficult to spot or notice any weird behavior. And so we want to make sure that we work with our forestry department and things like that to do the best we can. Lastly, I think any wise person tries to only take risk in areas where they have expertise. So if security, which is not my area of expertise, we should seek help. And so we've tried to meet with local officials, our developers who have some expertise, the police. We've also created a property security RFP that we're going to be releasing shortly, in which the strategy around that is in certain areas, you actually need to have security in zones that are actually not just securing sort of the property inside and out, but you have to secure it sort of around these properties. So this would be most efficient in areas where we have a lot of high theft, but also have accumulated a nice amount of property. And so we can create these zones. And in the RFP, we're actually asking for these participants or vendors to actually use analytics to come up with the actual security type. And so in certain neighborhoods here in Chicago, we can look at the data and know that most robberies are taking place on Fridays between 9 a.m. and 1 o'clock, which was odd times for me to realize. I thought it would be much later. But in fact, you can use this data that the police department has, and you can get online to see what the patterns are, and then create a plan appropriately to do that. And with that, I am done with my presentation.
Thank you so much, William. It was really a pleasure to hear a lot about the security issues that you guys are facing, and specifically around the insurance requirements here with the developers and also these security zones based on data and analytics that the city has. I'm sure other communities might have the same type of analytics and might find that a very useful tip. Thanks so much. Before we jump into questions and answers, let me just take a few moments to talk a little bit about insurance with respect to the security issues. So first, as we've heard from the grantees today, that grantee sub-recipient developments are required to carry insurance under NSP. These premiums can be activity delivery costs or program admin costs based on the entity in which we're talking about, as well as based on how the negotiations have gone for the contract between the grantee and the subrecipient and or developer. And then if theft or vandalism occurs, the deductible is an allowable expense under NSP. Continuing on, the insurance policy should include protection against damage, theft, vandalism, etc. And we're really trying to call that out here because some communities didn't realize that it might have had the first-party property policies might have had an exclusion for theft. And if that happens, then now you're left with a big issue if there's theft versus just vandalism or other type of fire or arson damage. So please make sure that you read those policies, and great opportunity after this call to go back to your policy or talk to the other departments in your city and county to make sure that these policies allow for the protection against all different types of theft, damage, vandalism, and security issues that you may face. And also make sure you shop around for these policies. Superior coverage for the theft and vandalism is something we recommend you look into. Additionally, for when insurance proceeds, when there is a security issue and you get insurance proceeds from things like vandalism, it's considered miscellaneous revenue and not program income, and therefore it's not reported as program income. A way to think about this for a lot of people out there is that insurance proceeds is similar to an applicable credit or an offset against the NSP expense. So the grantee that has already put that money into the deal. So another example about that would be, for example, the closing costs. Sometimes you bring in a dollar amount to the closing costs and $100 wasn't needed, so that comes back to the city. It's not a program income, it's an applicable credit, and this is the same type of idea here. Something you realize is generally, though, that's used to directly repair that unit, that project, for the vandalism. So we also want to highlight here that what HUD will be looking at is making sure that national objective is met, and the grantee must ensure that the insurance money is used to rebuild the structure, most importantly, that it's used for that national objective. That's what they're going to be double-checking and looking at. Let me pass back. We're going to be going into our question and answer period. We'll have Rita, Brian, and William staying with us to answer all the questions you guys have out there. Vinny, can you remind folks how to ask a question?
Sure. Thanks, Janine. Again, if you would like to ask a question, you could change your feedback box to purple, which means you have a question. You can type your question in via the Q&A box in live meeting. And especially if you're typing questions in, if you could specify which grantee your question is for, that would be helpful. And again, we won't be mentioning names, so all the questions are anonymous. And you can also ask your question by hitting *1 on your phone. The operator will get a hold of you and put you in the queue. And during that time, if your question has been answered, you can hit *2 to get out of the queue. So we look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Vinny. So feel free to write in those questions. Go ahead and hit *1, and we'll start accepting questions. We do have a question that has popped up, so let me start there. And again, feel free to send in those questions. So this question is for William, the City of Chicago. The questioner stated that they noticed on one of your pictures there was a multi-story building, and on the second story, it looked like it was being secured with plywood. And this questioner would like to know the method used for securing that. Was it used bolts with 2x4 headers across the interior opening, or other ways in which you're securing second stories?
Thank you. Yeah, the City of Chicago's vacant building ordinance has actually defined ways of properly securing buildings. Not everyone does it the way that the ordinance calls for, but it is a hex bolt. So it's a 2x4 with a hex bolt attaching the plywood to the property. And hopefully that's a good enough answer you can understand. But yeah, it is 2x4s on the inside with the bolt.
Great, thank you. And Rita and Brian, do you guys do any multi-story buildings that you have to do second-story bolts as well?
In Columbus, we do, our city code requires that board ups be both the first and second floor, so yes.
In our case, most of ours are, they may be a 2-story or potentially a 3-story. If necessary, they do get boarded up, mostly during construction or prior to, but of course, afterwards we try not to have anything boarded up because then it looks like it's an empty house.
Definitely. Good point there. And operator, do we have anyone that's called in yet?
We have no questions in the queue at this time.
Great. Well, while we still wait for you guys to call in or ask any questions online, HUD, David and John, do you guys have any questions or any other statements you want to throw out there regarding security issues?
We don't have any questions. We're sort of flabbergasted at how much is, how under assault these properties seem to be, though. It's pretty amazing. So I hope it's not this way every place, but I guess it's probably pretty much of an issue wherever you go.
It does seem like a theme, I agree, and it sounds like some great lessons learned here about thinking through the phasing of your project. So kind of the warehousing, when William's saying they do some of the warehousing, what does security look like there versus when you're going into the winter season? How do you think about your development and security there?
Right.
I think we've got a couple more. Oh, go ahead, John.
I'm sure it's, the problem is no matter what you do, it adds to your costs. So, I mean, I guess it'd be nice if you could at least, like maybe employ some people to stand there, but, even that might not be enough, so.
Yeah, and I think, this is a William, I didn't get into that too much, but we do employ sitters as well. And so there are people who, once the building is sort of underway and livable, actually stay on site, on property during construction. Again, they add some human element to it and not just boarded up or alarmed.
Right. Yeah, I remember in Reno, the housing authority there is doing some, they've acquired a number of properties and some subdivisions, and they're all kind of close together, and they have, in the same couple of blocks at least, and then they have a person that, is sort of a handyman type who, makes some rounds and stuff, and so, that's one more argument for targeting, I guess. It's not going to work if you get spread too far out, but, if you have enough properties in an area, it might pay off to have somebody, making the rounds a couple of times a day, and that kind of thing.
We do have a few questions that have popped up here on the scroll. So let me go to the first one. It says, and this is not to anybody in particular, so Rita, Brian, or William, feel free to jump in here. How do you allocate the cost for purchasing and installing the security equipment?
Janine, I would hope that that question goes to, do we consider it project delivery versus
Project
or maybe if there's a mixed income or mixed use building. On our typical sites in which security has been installed, it's been 100% NSP, and we consider it part, frankly, of the cost of construction to keep the materials secure. Now, we are working on a mixed use building right now, and we are doing that based on a percentage of commercial to residential.
Yeah, Rita, here in Lee County, this is Brian, we do exactly the same thing. It becomes part of the actual expense that you have for each individual property.
And it's same in Chicago. It's the individual cost of the properties.
I have a question, Brian, for you here. This was the alarm monitoring successful in keeping the property safe and secure? Then he's also asking, can the cost of the alarm monitoring be applied to NSP funds?
Yeah, the cost, actually that was not monitored. It was just a local, they call local alarm only. It did deter a little bit. I'm not saying that it was totally inefficient, but we did find some situations where the alarm was sounded and a neighbor did respond. So it was effective from that standpoint, but it just wasn't the end-all for our situation.
Thank you. We also have a question here concerning the insurance coverage after the rehab work is completed. It says in Florida, our developers are told by the insurance agents there isn't any insurance coverage available for the vacant homes that cover theft. The builder's risk doesn't cover the house after rehab work is completed. Do any of you guys know of any specific insurance available? And this was someone coming from Florida themselves.
Well, here in Ohio, like I said, the one house was complete before it was vandalized and the appliances were stolen. The way that the contract was written between the developer and the builder's risk insurance was maintained on the property until occupancy. So the builder's risk insurance in that instance paid the loss.
And this is Brian again in Lee County. Our situation is we retain title to that property throughout the whole process. And again, our situation is a little different because we do self-insure. So if there is a situation that happens afterwards, obviously there's no insurance policy to go after. I do know, as my background being a general contractor, that is potentially a problem for sure in the state of Florida, that people do not like, or insurance companies do not like to insure vacant property. So I don't know if it's considered vacant, if it's still for sale, or if you're in the process of selling, if that might help. I'm just not 100% sure.
John, David, have you heard of this at all in Florida, and any lessons learned? You guys have heard about this issue?
No, I haven't. This is one where we were saying we're pretty ignorant, so, I mean, we're ignorant about a lot of things, but this is just another one.
Great.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. I have the questioner's name and email, so if we get any emails, and if any of you guys out there do have some suggestions for this questioner, feel free to email it in onto the NSP Resource Exchange, and we'll collect that question and pass it along to you. So maybe some other folks have had some success here. Are there any questions on online at all, operator?
We currently have 2 in the queue. We'll go first to Frank.
Yes, thank you. We are in the process of executing a developer agreement to transfer our properties that have not been rehabbed to a Habitat for Humanity. We have some properties that are fully rehabbed, haven't been sold yet, and they're becoming victims of vandalism. Can we, as part of the package under a developer agreement, transfer our rehabbed properties as well to our developer if no additional rehab is needed?
That wouldn't actually qualify as a development, right? Because if you look at the citation that we use to determine who's a developer and who's not, it comes under 570-202B1, which speaks to a private individual or nonprofit or for-profit entity that is acquiring property for the purpose of rehabbing it to serve an income-eligible family. If you've already done the acquisition and rehab, then there's no rehab left for the entity that you're selling it or passing it on to do. So you wouldn't consider that entity to be a developer. They might be a property manager, or if you're selling the property, they might be an agent helping you sell the property, but it wouldn't be a developer, though.
Great. Frank, does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And the next question?
We'll go next to Sam.
Actually, I have 2 questions. Number one, where can I get my hands on a copy of the
consent to enter form. I think that would be a really good first step for me on getting going with the properties that we're taking a look at. Number two is on the air conditioning cages. In my area in Central California, 98% of everything that's installed is a rooftop combo pack. And I'm just curious if there's, I've been online here during this discussion, and I'm aware there's cages for those things. But does anybody else out there, are they having the same type of theft problems with rooftop mount units as they are with the ground units?
This is Brian from Lee County, Florida. One of the things that we considered in lieu of a cage is to get security-type screws and basically unscrew the screws that hold the outside casing, and then use almost like you would for your if you're going to change a tire and you had a secure lug nut, and you would have to take a specialty type bit that would unscrew those things to have somebody gain access. We didn't do it, but it was something that we thought about, so I don't know if that helps or not.
Okay, that's helpful.
This is Will Towns from Chicago. In certain building types where the roof allows, we have moved the AC units to the roof and have seen a dramatic reduction in theft or attempt of theft in those properties.
Okay, very helpful.
And this is Rita Parise from Ohio. The consent to enter form is actually a form from the Columbus Division of Police. As I indicated, I've got somebody here who's very technologically oriented. I think at the end of this presentation, one of the slides is going to have everybody's email address that was the presenter today. Yeah, feel free to email me, and I will have someone send you the consent form.
That'd be helpful. At least when I go into the local sheriff's office, I have something to show them. I mean, for all I know, they've already got something, but it'd be very helpful to have something along those lines, or specifically along the lines of the NSP. So.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's not NSP specific.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I think most of them have, most police and sheriff's departments have something like that because these kind of situations come up, in a variety of circumstances. So, and I'm wondering about the thieves. So, if you're going to steal them from the rooftops, do you need a crane for that? I mean, you think that
yeah. No, you need a crane to get them up there. That's for darn sure. So, I've been doing rehab, CDBG and home money for 9 years now, and I've only had one break-in in all that time. So, and that just happened here fairly recently on a very rural property. So, I've got my fingers crossed, but this is going to be some incredibly helpful information going into this thing. So,
good luck.
Great, and just to show you, we did put up here on the screen the email addresses for folks on this call, and so if there's any follow-up or a question you might have, don't hesitate. They've been gracious enough. We appreciate their time today and helping in any peer-to-peer work going forward. Is there another call on the line?
Again, *1.
Great, we have a couple of emails in. There's one that actually is sharing a little bit. They said they really like the house sitter idea to provide security and housing for someone. They also suggested for us on the call is painting the plywood used for the board up. It makes the property look much better. Any of you, Brian, Rita, or William, have you guys tried that before, any of the painting of the plywood in certain neighborhoods? Has that been a good use of dollars out there for security?
Well, in Ohio, in Columbus, the city code requires that the plywood on a vacant house does have to be painted. However, our land bank has actually gone one step further, and as a community project in a couple of different communities, there have been paintings done on the plywood, like pictures or paintings of windows, for example, so it looks more like you're looking into a house versus a vacant house. And then a couple other instances, there have been scenes put on the plywood. So it's code compliant, but it's a little bit more creative. I'm not necessarily sure that it does a whole lot relative to securing the property, but the neighbors are appreciative of the fact that we are at least trying to make the best out of a difficult situation.
Yeah, here, where my location here in Florida, it's kind of the same thing. Being a coastal environment, we have hurricanes to deal with, so there's a lot of people that have hurricane shutters. So on some of the homes, we've been actually putting hurricane shutters up as also a secondary thing, not just for protection against windborne debris, but also from security.
Here in Chicago, the same thing. We have partnered with a group that was going out and doing some initial painting and things. We haven't had a whole lot of success in doing that sort of citywide. We looked at it in a couple of instances. Again, we got a pretty strict vacant building ordinance, which in fact requires the removal of the plywood after 6 months and the applying of steel shutters if in fact it's vacant for more than 6 months with no activity. And so in some cases we found through the length of construction or the length of transferring properties that we end up removing those and putting on the shutters to comply with the code.
Right. The individual who asked the question of how do we report the insurance proceeds in DRGR. And as I said before, as this is not program income in DRGR, you don't record anything that way. There's two options you need to do and think through. Is one, really the proceeds need to be going back into the property so it could be a reimbursement basically to the money you're putting into the property to do fixing the theft and vandalism. If you're not able to do that, whatever happened with the property and you're holding this money now, you have two options you need to think about. If it's going to offset your next draw, assuming your next draw is very soon, and so you're not keeping that money on hand, that you're offsetting your next draw. If that's the case, you keep it in and do that very quickly. If you're not offsetting your next draw and you're going to keep it on hand for long periods of time, that's not allowable. And my recommendation is to call the field office and talk about what that length of period of time looks like, how much money that is that you're holding, and they may recommend that you cut a check back to HUD for the proceeds, or they may recommend you keeping it and then offset the next draw based on the time and dollar amount of that. And another question we have is someone was asking, how do we get a copy of this presentation? Vinny, can you tell us a little bit about how someone gets the copy of this presentation after we end here?
Sure. Actually, and on the next slide, we'll have the link to the NSP Resource Exchange. If you go into the Learning Center, you can look up today's webinar, and actually the slides are already on the website, so you can go ahead and download them. And also on the last listserv, the Join Today listserv that you all received, there is actually a link to download the presentation. But if you want the full audio with the slides, that'll be posted to the Learning Center within the next couple of days.
Thanks so much. Are there any more questions in the operator in the queue there?
We currently have no further questions in the queue at this time.
Hey, do you guys have any questions or any thoughts based on some of the great questions we're getting out here?
No, I'm glad that we have some experienced folks that can give good advice about what's been working for them. I really appreciate all of our presenters on this. It's not something that we've really gotten into that much here at headquarters, at least. So this is really valuable. But I don't think I have any advice based on this except to follow the advice of these folks. And I appreciate they're taking the time to put this together for us.
Something I haven't asked any of you guys, Rita or Brian or William. Do you have any questions for each other? You guys have had the pleasure of listening to each other, but any questions or any thoughts that you guys have based on the other programs that are going?
No, I just have one comment. I really like the idea of having the developers come in periodically or quarterly to really sort of assess strategies, things that have worked, things you're seeing and trending. I think that is a phenomenal idea and something we'll probably try to implement here in Chicago.
It's worked out really well for us, William. We do more than just the security issues, obviously. We talk about the technical developments, some new guidance in NSP, different community ways, different ways that our organizations are integrating with their community where they're working at. And it's been very valuable. We generally set up 3 hours once a quarter, and we always run late. And it's not just a bunch of talking heads from the city. We bring in speakers to talk about Energy Star issues. We always have a lender or two to talk about what kind of mortgage products are out in the market and the like. And yeah, we love it. It's been great. And it really, frankly, saves us staff time instead of trying to, if there's a new development, call each developer and make sure they know, or you've got an issue that you want to work through. You just bring everybody together, and then they all frankly learn from each other, and we learn from them. So it's been very helpful.
A really great model out there for folks that are at kind of the size and scope of Columbus or similar to that, to bring these folks together and to communicate. Do you ever have police come to those, Rita, and your other partners around the security issues?
Yes. We had one developer meeting where we had 2 community liaison officers come, and they passed out, they have these pens that you can write on, like air conditioners and things like that, and then they also passed out the little black flashlight where you can see as long as you identify the property, and they can identify it. If it's in a resale shop, they can take their black flashlights and identify the property. And then we also had somebody from Building and Zoning Services come to talk about how to try to stage the inspection so that they work out best for the developers and minimize the risk of loss.
Great. This is very value-added for everyone. Well, it looks like we might be a little bit early here, but before we kind of sign off, I just want to make sure, are there any other questions out there? Operator, do we have anybody else on the line?
We have no further questions in the queue at this time.
Great. I see no more written-in questions at this time. I do want to encourage folks, though, to double-check these emails, write them down now. As Vinny said, that you can go ahead and go online to the Resource Exchange Learning Center, and you'll get the slide deck, and you can also get the emails through that, so that you can email if you have any questions or want to talk a little bit about an idea that William or Brian or Rita have put in place. Do you guys have any more questions?
No. Thanks.
Great. This is an excellent call. We really appreciate your time. All of you out there, especially Rita, Brian, and William, we've learned quite a bit about security, a little alarming to some of us that don't do this day to day and really see what desperate times are calling for many people to do, all the way from kind of craning themselves in to breaking the cages on ACs even. So we appreciate your time, and we look forward to our next webinar out there, as well as we'd like for you all to stop for a moment and give us some of your feedback and fill out this security survey monkey. Thank you so much, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.